Excuse me,
Oh,
I need a
sure.
clear shot here.
All righty.
If I could.
That'd be great. Oh, okay. Oh, you leaned out of the picture there. I was seeing you and Rena. Then you leaned back. I didn't see you anymore.
He's a ghost.
Oh.
Hi, Mr. Bermudez. We get ready
Hello.
to go on. Wait. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 in Lansing, Michigan, nestled in the middle of the beautiful capital city of Michigan.
Lansing, Michigan, here we are.
Yes.
And this is Bonnie Buckaroo sprinting in from the other room doing double duty tonight. Thank you so much to Rena for doing our station ID. She was stretched it out as long as she could so that I didn't have to be too windy. This is Bonnie Buckaroo, Lansing Online News Radio. My co-host Bill Castanier this evening lost his mother just before Mother's Day. So he is up in Bay City this evening and he'll be back next Monday night. But tonight, in addition to Rena Risper and her guests, we will also be joined, as is our regular feature, with Eric Schertzing, Ingham County Treasurer. And Eric made headlines this week in the Lansing City Pulse for some comments on what's happening with Jackson National Life. I live out in that area. It's a huge building. They've got their headquarters out there. And there were glowing reports in all the local media about the 1,000 new jobs coming. But there is a sort of a downside to some of what happens with luring large corporations like that to do expansions. And Eric, what's the other side of that story?
Well, they are a wonderful corporation that pays good salaries, but when it comes to paying taxes, apparently they want to be a minimum wage employer. They cite in our community because of the high quality of life for living, working, and playing. But like so many other large companies, Meyer Corporation comes to mind. When it comes to property taxes, they've done everything they can to lower that tax liability, which hurts the city of Lansing's ability to get the roads paved and pay for police services.
Yeah, I was there in the meetings when they were arranging this deal. It's sort of an odd deal that they cut. Even though they're out in the Okemos area, off of Okemos Road, the land is actually Lansing's. And so there's a strange sort of arrangement where part of the property tax would go to the city of Lansing, part would also go to Allerton Township, where the land is actually physically located. It doesn't even touch Lansing, it's not contiguous. So it was a strange deal to begin with. But I remember when they then, so many of us weren't happy necessarily to see a large facility go in that close to a rural area. But we thought, well, we would benefit from some of the tax dollars. But then when they came back, I forgot how many years ago it was, and asked for an adjustment because they were arguing that their headquarters was already obsolete and that they shouldn't have to pay their full share of the property taxes because otherwise they would abandon the area and go build somewhere else. Isn't that typically the threat that corporations use?
It is absolutely. They put tremendous amounts of dollars into beautiful structures in our community.
Yeah.
And then when all is said and done, well, some of them aren't. I don't know that you would say that Meyer Thrifty Acres are beautiful structures, but they're very useful and utilitarian structures. And certainly everybody needs a grocery store. But then when they're done, they want them to be practically functionally obsolete because nobody else could use it, and therefore the property taxes shouldn't be levied very high. I think Jackson National Life on this deal that they initially petitioned in 2010 will probably save $400,000 a year or so on property taxes. That's one.
That's a lot of money for a community to lose.
Uh, it's a little easier for Lansing in the negotiations with the 425 agreement properties because they're looking at the income tax that they'll get off of those additional employees
Right.
that are coming in. But the schools and everybody else that levies the taxes, the county, we do suffer.
One of the things I've wondered about, Eric, is structurally, it's almost impossible not to have companies competing like this, however. I mean, when we look at it, that's why we see so often the pressure to erode some of the hard-won things that labor has earned, for example. Well, let's get rid of some of the protections because we want to be competitive. If you want that new GM plant, if you want that new big company, it seems that states and local municipalities are in this terrible bidding war. And I mean, is there any way around that?
Well, I certainly spend a lot of time in economic development. That's a big part of my, avocation that I enjoy in life. But there are these quandaries in this process because
Mm-hmm.
localities, states, even countries do compete against each other for these plants, and everybody just goes full out. I think the interesting part is, think of ourselves as people investing in retirement accounts. The,
Right.
the other side of our existence, we want our stocks to go up and to have fully funded retirement plans. But, the companies in my retirement plan must be very stingy. They don't
Ah.
want to pay their property taxes. And so we used to have a corporate culture that I think cared more about the quality of the community that they were in.
They felt invested in it, didn't they?
I don't know if it was a different ethics or morals or if it was just different statutes. Some folks have claimed that the statutory authority and the case law and the court system have really made it such that corporations need to be much more worried about the bottom line and about shareholder value. But it seems to me that investing in the community so it can invest in its roads and police and fire has a pretty good return to any company and all of its employees here.
Well, that's always been one of the challenges, is that some court cases came along and said that if a company did things that didn't blacken the bottom line, if they did things other than that, that they were violating the shareholders' trust. Because the only thing required of a corporation is that it make profit for its shareholders. It has no other and follows the law of the land.
But it is a person.
But it is a person. But Eric, Eric, I keep saying, if they're really a person, then how come they're not getting executed in Texas? Look what they just did blowing up all those people.
Yeah.
They aren't quite people when it comes to the downside of the law, only the upside. And that's what I'm concerned about. So where will we be if JNL puts in this extension? How long before they want a rebate on?
Well, it didn't used to be that common. It was certainly driven in part by the economy and law firms like Honigman, Miller, Schwartz, and Cohn, who are really one of the biggest shops in the state of Michigan, really building up a business out of lowering the taxable value of business clients around the state.
Oh, so they go in and help leverage that, work with the local communities. They're the,
The,
I see.
the law firms go into these corporations, they do trainings at gatherings and teach them, tell them how their services can help them lower the taxable value on their property.
Oh, really?
I mean, think about Meyer Thrifty Acre up in DeWitt, I think, was the one that kind of started it in this area. They finished their new building.
Mm-hmm.
And the year later or 2 years later, they're insane. This thing would not work for anybody else. It's a single purpose. It works for us. It can have no value because nobody would buy it from us. Only does it have value to us.
So if we walk away from it, you're going to have this white elephant mausoleum that makes you nothing. At least by having the store there, you're keeping the consumers happy and you're adding X number of jobs.
Because it's a really interesting dichotomy, though, between Jackson National Life. They have facilities around the country. They could locate other places.
Yeah. Didn't they start in Jackson?
Well, they started right here in Lansing.
Oh, did they in Lansing?
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
they had some facility in Jackson.
But tomorrow and next week and next month and next year, we're going to need a grocery store.
Right.
It
Right.
might not, you might go to Kroger rather than Meijer
Right.
or somebody else. But, those grocery stores aren't going to go anywhere because I'm not going to drive to Brighton to get my groceries.
Yes.
So there's a difference between those two different facilities.
And I'm not so sure that that facility would not be picked up by another grocery store if Meyer abandoned it. I think perhaps Kroger could learn to love the way the facility was organized. Or I'm not sure that we get much. Does Walmart do the same thing? Are they all in the same business now of holding communities, in essence, up for ransom?
Honigman Miller and other law firms have made a good living for the last 5, 10 years helping companies lower their taxable value just as far as they can possibly do it. And the economy has certainly helped. Although some of the arguments are circular, some people look at that Jackson National headquarters and the way it was constructed with the open floor plans and say it's very adaptable.
Yeah.
And the appraiser, the assessor, the corporate attorneys on the other side are arguing just the opposite. It's a very, the tax tribunal and those attorneys and the companies, it's all a very small world.
It is, and what we have, I think, unfortunately, is we are the most litigious nation on the face of the earth. We churn out more lawyers than anybody else, and they're looking for something to do, so they have the time to sort of pore over the tax codes and find these niches and find these ways to sort of, I view it as almost parasitically sitting on top of the system, but they distort it compared to where it was 20 years ago.
Well, if you translated it into the residential environment, it would be each of us going in arguing that, I decorated and built this house just for myself. Nobody else is going to want it. You should assess it at half the value that it's presently assessed at.
Unfortunately, about my house, that's probably true. I own a home that is up on stilts. Not a terribly smart kind of construction. It looks really good on a cliff in California, but when those winds howl underneath during the winter, see, now I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that with my local tax assessor.
Well, in tax foreclosure, I do walk into a lot of pretty strange houses.
I'll
so
bet you do.
There's a little something to that, I
I'll
think.
bet you do. Yeah, I live out there in the neighborhood, and so far as I've said, the only real change I've seen is a lot more traffic and so forth. So there is an increased need for services as well. I mean, one of the challenges I think that we face in the United States right now is figuring out an equitable system where we keep enough middle-class incomes going so that people are able to pay good taxes. We want those good jobs in the community. Without those jobs, we would suffer. But at the same time, we still have to have that other pot of money coming from corporations. They used to account, back in the good old days, as I think of it, for about 42% of our overall federal tax revenue, and they've dropped significantly since then. And they keep arguing that their tax rates are too high, but nobody ever pays them. The major corporations have a fleet of lawyers out there making sure that their tax bill's zero.
Absolutely. Things in this country are obviously driving inequality,
Yeah.
and it's becoming, I think, dangerous.
I do too. Now, it's a problem at the local level, but does it require a federal fix? Or is there, because communities in and of themselves don't have the power to go up against a corporation.
States, of course, we have 50 states, we have 50 different ways at the state level of collecting revenue. You could have a different balance. Of course, Governor Snyder just did a $1 billion plus shift of expenses from corporate Michigan to the individual taxpayer. You and I and all of your listeners, everybody in mid-Michigan, felt themselves paying a lot more in state income taxes on April 15th because corporate America isn't. So it adds up. They're not paying the income tax. They want to pay less on the property tax. What else do they want to pay less on?
I know. Well, we're watching this crisis occur in various school districts around the state of Michigan right now. I understand Pontiac may soon go the way of Buena Vista and not have enough money to keep operating just as we're coming to the end of the school year here. To maintain a middle-class life, it's going to require, something has to change.
But, people have to fundamentally examine. We just had a national election that I think was an awful lot about jobs and maintaining and building the middle class. And then as soon as we turn around, they're off on a completely different topic. Folks have to examine what are the things in our history that allowed us to build a middle class.
Yeah.
And it was not an unbalance between labor and capital. It was a balance between labor and capital. And labor has lost its leverage to pry out of capital. I mean, there has to be a balance. What we're doing is not working. We're going in the wrong direction.
Well, and I see that there are even more bills in the hopper now at the state level. There's another one that Representative McMillan is pushing again, trying to have individual penalties against union members if they picket unfairly in front of businesses. I mean, we already have laws on the books that handle that kind of problem, but we're seeing that there's a whole new spate of legislation coming here in Michigan that I think is quite worrisome. So you kind of have to be vigilant. I think citizens need to be more engaged than ever before. So where do they go to fight back? How do they organize? Where do they go?
I'm looking for people to really think about and reflect. How do you get a middle class?
Yeah.
Labor is absolutely one of the answers that we've had. Some type of organization of labor, whether it looks like the UAW today or the MEA or something else. But what we've been doing hasn't worked. So there has to be more of a conversation, more critical analysis, more engagement with a broad spectrum of people, so that they, how do you get a middle class? What is it? How is it going to happen? People need to think this through for themselves, because when you just say, organized labor, we know that tends to fall on an awful lot of dead ears.
There's a lot of knee-jerk reactions. There's certain buzzwords on both sides that lead to the same old arguments. I can see Rena Risper, our guest, and she's holding back, but I'm going to bring her into this conversation. Rena, what's your concern?
My thing is that we don't even talk to each other anymore. We don't talk to each other as people. We walk by, we ignore each other, we look at our titles and think about the guy who is working as a, just the guy who's fixing the electrical. We don't even engage in conversation anymore. So how can we even talk about what is going on in our lives as individuals and as a community as a whole? Forget it.
Yeah.
I mean, we go to work, we go to sleep, and we go to church. And they're all segregated environments.
We've lost leisure time. We look at what's happened to America over the last 30 years, and people don't have the leisure time they once had. There's a book called Bowling Alone that talks about how people don't have much time for civic engagement anymore. It's sort of paralleled the death of the bowling leagues. People don't have time to do that anymore. They don't have the places where they associate. I was struck in this past week, and we'll be talking with Rena and some of her guests about violence, but I was struck when the media interviewed Charles Ramsey, the man from Cleveland. I grew up in Cleveland in a neighborhood not dissimilar to the one that was on the news. I saw a woman murdered out of my bedroom window, watching in the courtyard across the street when a man stabbed his wife to death as he chased her around. And it was kind of like Kitty Genovese. Nobody did anything about it. They just sort of stood and watched. And there was a lot of violence in the community. The boy next door took a gun to school, shot our teacher, that kind of thing. And this was, I was born in 44, so this is a long time ago. We've had troubled communities for a long, long time.
See, with that, people didn't have the internet. We didn't have Associated Press. And we did not have 24-hour news service. So when you're thinking about how we process the news now, these things were going on for a very long time.
Oh, they were.
People missing and, with the mafia on top of that. I mean, that's just a whole nother. I grew up in New York, so, we were finding body parts all over the place. It's just,
but see, people seem so surprised that Mr. Ramsey was actually quite a straightforward and charming man who put his own life on the line to save somebody else if he hadn't had the courage to do it. And he thought it was a domestic, and the rule is you never interfere in a domestic because you're likely to be the one who gets hurt. So he had the courage to do that, and I was just so pleased to see that. What was the first thing the press did? They did a background check on it and found out that 20 years ago he had a couple domestics. Now his ex-wife has come out and said, and he's changed his life since then, and he's a good man. And I was so pleased to see that.
Well,
great.
But we don't see people from those neighborhoods. The people that I grew up with never get to the news. They don't get to the microphone. No one hears their voices.
And this serves the interest of those with power and money. That's why it is so critical to engage more.
Yes.
And there's pieces of it starting in different parts of the community.
Yeah.
But we know how much they dislike community organizers.
They do indeed.
We had that lesson
Yes.
in the 08 presidential election.
Yeah, don't you care about Benghazi? Isn't that your sole driving force these days, to make sure that Benghazi is dealt with? It seems to be on the agenda. Meanwhile, the climate just hit 400 parts per million. We had an organization I was part of, Bill McKibben ran, 350 parts per million was supposed to be the limit. We blew right by that. Now we've blown by 400. I mean, we have major problems that we have to deal with. I think the challenge too, and I would add to your thesis, Eric, a corollary that says we have to figure out how to maintain a middle class life for people. And we have to do it while we're making this wrenching transition from cheap energy that fuels growth into an alternative model. And we haven't figured that piece out yet. I don't think there's an easy answer to that.
Well, you know, that we should look to the Canadians. You know, in Ontario, they have a minimum wage of $10.75, and they're talking about raising it because it hasn't been raised in a couple of years. You know, how can you care about the middle class if you don't even care about the lower class and the working poor in the country?
I know when the neighborhood I grew up in, it was a tough neighborhood, but still, if a person got a job at a factory, you know, you either went to the military or you went into one of the factories. My father made enough as a sweeper in a shop to be able to have my mother stay home, take piano lessons, have somebody else paint our house. These are things that you couldn't do on just one income nowadays. So we've seen this dramatic shift. You know, we now have both parents in the workforce and sometimes making less overall than they did back in the days when it was a one-income family. We haven't figured this piece out yet.
Well, not only do we have that occurring, but we're also a more transient society. We don't all live together anymore, so you have to pay for all the services that you used to get. Daycare.
Yeah, mom can't do it anymore.
You know, someone used to cook a big meal for you. You don't
Yeah.
have that anymore. And then we become so materialistic where, I mean, who really needs a new car every 4 years? Who really needs to have, you know, 500 count Egyptian sheets? I mean,
I wish I knew what that meant. What are they counting?
they're
The
counting
threads.
Egyptians?
The
The
threads.
threads.
Oh, the threads.
The more threads, the more
500
durable.
Egyptians worked on them.
Maybe.
They're more durable with the multiple threads.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Ingham County Treasurer Eric Schertzing and with Rena Risper. And maybe it's time, I know Eric probably has many other places to be as well, or can hang around for a while. I'd like to make the transition into broadening the conversation and bring in Vivian Bodiford, who is here with Rena, because we're talking about violence in the community and Rena's work in trying to reduce overall violence. Rena, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing lately.
Well, basically, I just have kind of taken it upon myself to help families of murder victims. I started the New Citizens Press Community Action Network. Well, I think it really started in 2003, but
You got your status.
I have my status. I just filed my paperwork in March, and what I found is that we've kind of created this family.
Yeah,
We've,
you
cre-
have.
we've created this family, and it's amazing when we're all together. No one even knows who we are, and we're all so impacted and so brutally hurt, and with these amazing stories of survival and dedication to living abundantly.
Yeah.
We had an event on Saturday at the library, and it was just so interesting. We brought in Shaka Sangor, who committed a murder at age 19. And what I think that we really need to start doing in this society is atoning for the things that we have done. You just spoke about Mr. Ramsey and how they pulled everything that he did from the past to the forefront. And this man just saved four individuals' lives.
Yeah.
And why do we have church? Why do we have jails? Why do we have drug abuse programs? Why do we have all of these programs to help each other? We as individuals can't even help ourselves psychologically. We want to just continually pull people back. So what I say is that let's start this atonement project. Let's start taking families. We take families up to Gus Harrison Correctional Facility. Not the family that was impacted by that person,
Right.
but just as a whole to try to get them accustomed to breathing.
These are victim impact panels.
Victim impact panels. And Gus Harrison has indicated that we're the first people who ever came to even talk to the prisoners about the crimes that they have committed. And they seem to be genuinely regretful. What I'm seeing is that crime usually happens in a split second or a couple of minutes, and you cannot take it back. It's like the person who, says something to you or calls you a name, and that hurts you. and you really can't take it back. You can't like crumble up a paper and then try to, smooth it out and get it back to where it used to be. So in working with the families, I find that we have just become helpful to one another, and we just had a great big huge dinner at City Council, and 100 people came out, and at that event, a woman was just having a conversation with me about her daughter, who's doing so amazing. She's an honor student. She's 17 years old. She doesn't have a boyfriend. She's going to LCC.
Rena has found the key.
I have a 16-year-old.
No point.
She's going to LCC and Eastern and has college credits, and her brother, who was recently murdered, was supposed to pay for her prom dress.
Yeah, I saw the pictures, though.
She
Your
looked
community
beautiful.
came together.
We got checks from Georgia for
Wow.
her. She had a beautiful dress, and at the last minute, at 3 o'clock, she said, "I don't have a tiara." I was like, "Baby girl, you're gonna get a tiara."
Yeah.
The tiara was $30. I was like,
Yeah, but you shocked me when you told me that the graduation outfit is 140.
140.
I thought that was part of the deal.
I figured we might as well just go all the way.
You
I mean,
might as well.
get her
We'll
her
clothe
cap
this
and
kid
gown, just
all the way till she
all
gets
the way
down the
until
aisle.
she gets down the aisle, especially since she's going to college.
Yeah.
She is going to college, and I'm really excited for her that she is going to college. What I find is that we have these grave sins that we're committing behind cloaks, and when they come to the light of the public, that's when it hurts the most. I mean, we all sin, and some people get caught, and some people get caught in the worst way, which is why they become murder victims. And the mother, she was just really honest with me about what happened to her son. And when you have a murder, the National Crime Victims' Rights Board,
Yes.
you cannot get reimbursement for counseling or medical expenses. If you were
The Michigan Crime Victim Services Commission will do that, however.
not if you were involved in a crime.
Oh, no, not if you're involved in it, no.
So if you were a drug dealer and you got stabbed and
Right.
you were in
If
a
it's in the
wheelchair,
yeah.
you can't get your wheelchair paid for.
Right.
So nothing,
Yeah.
the family members can't get services either, which really further complicates a lot of the crime and what's going on, especially here in the Michigan, Lansing, Michigan. I find it so shocking to me that there's so many families that are impacted by crime, and they all know each other. To me, I can't comprehend seeing a 7-year-old with two people's faces on it.
Yeah.
7 years old, one Miranda Garza and the other one Ignacio Bermudez.
Yeah.
And you know what? I tell people all the time, I never met Ignacio Bermudez. I never met him, but I know his son. I know his son, who was up on that stage on Saturday because he wanted to speak on behalf of his father and to tell the whole entire audience, here you have this 7-year-old, my youngest speaker ever, talking about how his father's death has impacted him. He is not to blame in this. We can't continually pull whole entire families into the sin of someone who's not even here. And once we get to that point, then I think that we'll start making better choices and better decisions regarding how we treat families and to help the victims who are still here move forward.
I remember years ago I was part of a national team that went to 60 different public housing developments nationwide to do anti-violence training. And one of the techniques we used to use, we'd bring the community and the police and hospitals and all these community people together. We'd do an exercise called Lifeboat, where everybody had to play a different role. One person would be the drug dealer, another would be the minister, another would be the police officer. And we'd put them in these little teams in lifeboats, or little fake lifeboats, and they'd have to decide, okay, water's coming in, and it'll only support 6 people, you've got 12, who goes? Well, you know, the person that goes first is always the drug dealer, right? And I said, the whole point of the exercise was, and when you throw them overboard, where do they go? Do they just drown? No, they go away for a few years into a facility, and they come back more embittered and are more hardened and more of a challenge than ever before. But we make sure that they don't get a job. No one will hire them the way we run the rules about who gets hired. So we make it impossible for people to be
It's that
redeemed.
whole redemption thing.
I worked with the restorative justice folks here in Lansing, and one of the people that I thought was just so brilliant said, what we really need is graceful redemption. He said, when a young person who has, in essence, sinned against the community, as you were talking about, comes back to the community, we need a process, we need a ritual
We need to
where we
shock
say,
him.
come back, talk to us, we're willing to give you another chance, but you need to work with us and assure us that you understand what you
You need
did.
to prove yourself.
Yes, you do.
And it's a continual process.
I can tell you, however, Rena, that when you look at someone like an Ariel Castro, who it was an impulsive moment maybe the first time,
And
But
Ariel
we did it for
Castro
10
is
years. He's a different
kind of beast.
but we paint everybody with that brush.
We do.
We say that everybody who has ever done time is an Ariel Castro, and they're not.
We do. And it's a really hard place to be when you're trying to raise a family, especially as a man.
Yeah.
Especially as a man who we have so many broken boys,
Yes, we
which
do.
is the reason why we have so many broken boys. And you know, I personally think that there should be an initiative for men to come forward, not this whole fake thing where we're going to have a seminar and we're going to do. I cannot stand that. Because if you're not inviting him to dinner to tell him that the plastic fork that he ate with last night is not really the way you're supposed to do things, then you're really not doing anything. You're just getting a grant from someone, bringing people in, sitting them down, and then sending them on their way. Because tomorrow he's got to wake up with a mother who's on the pipe.
Yeah.
And this is a stark cold reality for a lot of these kids who are going to school, and then we want to blame it on the parent. And sometimes, as you can see from the quality of some of our adults, they're not going to change.
Yeah.
We have to help the young people, especially our boys, be more successful.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Rena Risper and with Vivian Bodiford, and I think we will soon be joined here at the microphone with Mr. Bermudez. And I believe your first name, I need to get your first name. It's Nacho?
Ignacio.
Ignacio. But your nickname is Nacho?
Nacho.
Ah. And glad to see you. And I was hoping that you would contribute to this conversation because you lost your son to violence. And I'm wondering how it is that you think the community can come together to help the survivors.
Well, by getting more involved for one thing, first of all, and trying to speak about what they feel
Yeah.
in a very positive way. For instance, back a few years back, I went to prison for something that I had done wrong, and I took advantage of that. Within a month, I had enrolled in my GED.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Within 3 months, I completed it after 13 years of being out of school because I stopped working, went to work in the field to help my parents. My mother was killed. I, grew up, I got in trouble, and I like I said, when I got locked up, I took advantage of it. I went to school, took my GED within 3 months. I completed it, waited 6 months for my results, and then so I got those. I started go to college, and while I was incarcerated, came back
Which they
out,
don't do anymore.
Which they don't do
Right.
anymore.
and
Which was such a smart investment, wasn't it?
yes,
I mean,
yeah, I think it was. It really was. That was in Muskegon Correctional Facility.
Okay.
Brand new. I mean, you could even smell the mortar in the rooms. But then somebody.
What year was
escaped.
this, if you don't mind my asking?
That was in 1976.
Okay, that was the beginning of the sort of prison building boom
Yes,
when they were starting to build new facilities in the state.
yes. I was. I mean, they gave me a lot of privileges because of the fact that I was a trustee. I was going to college, and I also went snow skiing in Grand Rapids. I went swimming in Lake Michigan, and I did my time, and I also advise others to just do their time and try to make their sentence positive, because the fact that they still have to come out and continue their life. And that's what I did. I came out and I continued my life. I continued going to college here at LCC.
Excellent.
And I was going to college on and off. And in 2001, I graduated with general
Congratulations.
associates.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a, Rita, that I think we're just seeing a lack of education, a lack of support.
Well, that's one of the that's one of the issues that when we started this whole initiative to stop the violence, we did surveys, and education and employment were number one and number two. Number one and number two. And another thing is that um, it's amazing to me how people automatically feel that parents of those who are involved in crime have no education.
Right.
It's kind of disturbing, or they blame the parent
Right.
for what what the child or relative has done, which we are seeing in this atrocious Castro case where the two brothers are brought in.
Yeah.
I was amazingly enough today I was laying out my newspaper that comes out on Thursday, and I get things that are sent to me, and I was looking at a timeline for the three missing girls,
Yeah.
and one of the illustrations said three men were arrested for the abduction of the women, and I'm thinking to myself, these things once you put out there,
Yeah.
they're out there,
They're out there.
and it's very difficult to pull it back.
Where do I go to get my good name back?
Where do you go? Where do you go, and how long does it take to get that good name back? I mean, we're all not perfect, and what we need to do is concentrate on what we have in common instead of what we don't have in common.
But let me tell you, Rita, the thing that I told you just infuriated me over the weekend was on Mother's Day in New Orleans. 19 people were shot. And if those victims had been middle-class white people by the side of the road as the parade was going by, there would have been wall-to-wall coverage. Anderson Cooper would be there. He would be talking to the victim families. They would be receiving an outpouring of support. But because that occurred in a black, low-income neighborhood, they have been completely ignored. I mean, it is just, you hear a headline, 19 people were shot. And we say that we're serious about, we say we're serious about gun violence. 10-year-old children were shot on the street at a parade, and somehow that's not news. The kids at Newtown are news, but those are because they are adorable, middle class, upper middle class white children, and that's infuriating to me.
And what's even more so infuriating is that people will be infuriated at you for even saying that.
Well,
People need to recognize that a life is a life no matter what. And this is where I'm at right now. Most people, is ask me, well, why are you doing this? I look at all the families' faces and I'm thinking, well, why not?
yeah.
You have people who are sitting next to you at work that you don't know that was that person's favorite cousin, and that's your boss.
Yeah.
But they just didn't tell you about it. Or the guy who or even worse, the person who actually committed the murder's children,
Yes.
who now have to deal with the family, this whole sociological angst that they have to deal with as well. It's amazing to me because when I do have events, sometimes there will be people who will say, this person who is now deceased murdered my son.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's an epidemic of violence that touches us all. And on any given night, as you say, there are times where an impulse leads to that kind of disaster. And the person themselves would do anything to pull it back.
And
but they can't.
and I'm not against gun owners. I just don't think that the solution is to take away guns from gun owners. I think the solution is to make sure that those who are on the street with illegal guns
Well, that the only thing that concerns me about that is we've seen that one of the ways in which violence is unfortunately suppressed at times is that there are things like stop and frisk, which was used extensively in New
New
York
York
City.
City.
And I worked with the community policing movement at a time when stop and frisk came in. And I watched as it escalated, and it escalated beyond all belief. And it became community suppression policing. It became
Sure.
suppressing a community. And you can get a short term decline in the crime rates and in the violence rates for a while. But you build up such animosity
Oh,
between people
absolutely.
and elected officials and government that I think that you lose an access
But
to the
is there
tools you
something
need.
else that you can do without stopping and frisking everyone? I
Absolutely.
mean, there are all other kinds of solutions that we can have to violence. So it's amazing to me just the level of violence. And I also wanted to kind of discuss Lori Black's case because she has a 13-year-old who's now 15 years old. This
Put
is
you a little closer to the mic.
Lori Black, the mother of Shayla Johnson, who is dealing with the case with the 13-year-old who is now 15. And
Yes.
did you just recently go to court, or you're
Yeah.
on your way to court?
Yeah, we are in all different levels in my case. We just had we do a review every 6 months for the juvenile, and we just had our second 6 month review. So it's now been a year since he was sentenced.
Tell us a little bit about what happened and what he's been sentenced to.
He was sentenced for murder. He was sentenced actually in a blended sentence because he was
Okay.
a juvenile. So he's serving at the Maxie Boy prison until he's 21. And based on his behavior and his ability to rehabilitate and to grow and mature in his age, will determine whether he serves a adult sentence and how long that will be.
I see.
So.
And the interesting thing is each one of these guests are all at different levels. Miss Boterford's in Miss Boterford's case, her son was murdered, and it's supposedly solved, but not really solved. Explain that a little bit.
Okay. What happened is that when my son was murdered, his girlfriend was murdered at the same time. And evidently, she got up and she confronted the assailers, and she ended up cutting one of the people, and they bled all over the house. And then they stole her car after shooting her and my son. They stole her car, and one of their blood was all over the car. And what happened is, so that person's DNA was all over the house. And what happened is 12 days later, that young man was hit by a truck running from the police. And the thing is that they kind of don't want to put it out because they said, well, he's not here to defend himself, even they know for a fact that he was the main culprit because
But there's no legal way that they can try him now that he was killed in the accident?
he was killed
Yeah.
running from the police. He ran out in
Well.
front of a truck, and
So you can't get an official recognition that he was the person.
How can they do
that's
it on
true.
investigation ID? They say.
Well,
and they said that it was his DNA, but
Yeah.
Why can't
they
they
said
just issue a
because
statement?
he isn't here. And my daughters are pushing for that because people are still angry because his murders. He had several friends. I mean, there were like probably between 1,500 and 2,000 people at the funeral. It was packed, and there's still angry people. And then there's one other person that they understand is locked up that they believe was involved. And I don't know who the people are, but they're talking about getting him back when he's released from prison. So they do need to address the public and, clear up some
It's very
things.
frustrating because
Very.
there are part of the legalities. I mean, we want our rights protected if we're the person falsely accused. But on the other hand, in a case like this, it seems like it should be there should be some mechanism to acknowledge,
Right.
close the case based on that, but also deal with the other people involved.
It's
Yes.
really rips the family apart with Ignacio Bermudez's case, he had an absconder. That was
Um,
really interesting. The marshals were involved
Mhm.
in Ignacio's case, and I just thought that, you know, Lansing Police Department and the marshals did an amazing job of catching him. Um, I also wanted to talk about the
Before we leave that issue of absconding, I wanted to point out that in the Castro case, you notice that he was a repeat domestic violence offender.
Mhm.
And his late wife, who has been dead about a year now, he brutalized her completely.
Mhm.
But by not showing up in court and not having his attorney show up in court, nothing happened. Now that seems to me to just be startling in this day and age. That because he just was in essence a no-show, and it was better than showing up. You see, you made the mistake of showing up, and then they sentenced you. If you're just not shown up, in his case, they never did anything about it. They just let it go. And that's just amazing to me because the link between that kind of family violence and violence against others is pretty damn strong. And we still don't take
but
domestic violence seriously.
but then again, you can look at a case like Charles Ramsey.
Exactly. Well,
You
yeah,
can
but he
you
did.
can
He was arrested and he did his time and he turned around.
And
exactly.
they did his background check,
Yes.
and why can't they do that with this lady's, you know?
Yes.
Oh, they know
So,
his background.
yeah.
They told me that his MO was shooting people. It's not the first time he shot someone, and
They know it's him, but they can't issue an official statement.
Yeah,
right,
but they made an
because
official statement with Ramsey, is what I'm
Oh,
saying.
yeah,
And,
right,
you know,
yeah.
I mean, they
but
seem
see,
like they could do something with this case here also.
but
I,
Ramsey is still here, and they're
yes.
saying because he's deceased, they
Yeah.
can't make an
The
official
family's still
statement.
here.
I think
That you're
we,
right.
I think we all remember
Absolutely.
Columbine. Andrew Guy was a graduate of our School of Journalism, and he was a reporter for the Denver Post.
Hmm.
At the time that the shooting happened, he happened to be on his way across town, and they called him on his cell phone. The Denver Post did and said, "Stop by and see. There's something going on at that high school. We don't know what."
Hmm.
Because he was the only African American reporter there at the time. The family of the young man Isaiah Shoals, who was murdered, his family was one of those who, as the hours went on, and all the other families got their kids back, and a few families were still there and their children were not coming back. He bonded with that family very closely. And he had exactly the same sort of thing happen. His editor came to him and said, as Mr. Scholes became an active in the gun movement, trying to do some gun reform laws, his editor came to him and said, "Do a background check, see if he's got any kind of criminal history." And he said, "Are you doing a background check on all the other victim families?" "Well, no." "Well, why then Mr. Scholes?" "Well, he's getting active on the gun issue. We want to know." I said, "Well, other families are getting active on other issues related to this." But there's something, you're right, Rita, there is this sort of perception that there is a difference in black and white justice in the
There
United
is.
States.
There is. It happens in politics. It happens in a lot of different places. I mean, we really have to look at that um, as a way of life.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we don't have this open line of communication. That's one of the reasons why I'm the type of person that, hey, yes, that did happen. And you know what? And it's amazing to me being a victim of domestic violence and sexual assault, how I used to be so ashamed of it
Oh, me
until
too.
until I saw Tim Allen come out on TV and tell everybody that he sold drugs 20 years ago
Yeah.
and his reasoning behind that. And I remember sitting looking at the TV being absolutely depressed, thinking to myself, this is my last bottle of Paxil I'm going to take. I was just one of the most depressed. And this guy was the tool man who had made it this far, and people were bringing up his past and showing this.
Oh, yeah.
I was more upset for him, and he was just smiling, and I was like, you know what, Rena, that was the moving moment for me, watching him on TV saying, hey, yeah, it happened, keep it moving, people. I'm Tim the Tool Man now,
Yeah.
and I took that and ran
Graceful
with it.
redemption. That's what we need. Graceful redemption.
Exactly.
Yes.
We really
This is
do.
LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Rena Risper. We're talking with Nacho Bermudez, and it's Ignacio. We're talking with Lori Black and also with and Vivian Bodisford, and we're talking about how once there's violence in the community, we need to be able to assure people that there's a way out of that. To try to build in the structures. I did 2 books with the late Bob Turgenew on community policing, and I kept thinking about that Cleveland case. If there had been a neighborhood officer stationed in a little storefront in that community or stationed in the local elementary school. Somebody who was really connected with the community and talking to people on the street. When people saw things like the woman crying in the upstairs window holding the baby, and those kinds of things that looked strange, you would have had an officer that you could have gone up to and talked to. Many people are reluctant to call 911 for a variety of very good reasons. A lot of times when the police come, they're not very nice. I mean, I was working with police during the time that one drove by once when I discovered my son that must have bought a new car because I saw a hose hanging out of mine and my plates were gone. That was a pretty good clue. He probably got a car and he shouldn't be driving it. And I waved down the East Lansing police officer and said, "Help me, officer. I want to show to my son that you can't do those kinds of things." And he said, "That's your problem, lady," and drove on. And I thought, woo, sometimes I'm busy training police, and sometimes when I'm asking for help as a citizen, it's a whole different ballgame. We have to connect people in police and have a just system that helps people
Well,
and doesn't
I
ignore
would like
them.
to say that Daryl Green did call me to inquire about having a movie here about human trafficking.
Is that right?
So he did call me and inquired, thought it would be a really amazing idea. So I'll let you know what's going on with that. And, I'm going to reach out to all of the New Citizens Press Community Action Network individuals to get more involved in that process. We have a lot of missing children as well,
We do.
runaways and we have runaways here.
But we criminalize their part of that transaction.
Criminalize them.
And so it makes it so difficult for them to reach out for help.
We criminalize them even when they go back home and they've done something wrong. We make them feel like, they've just been the worst person ever. In the same way that Elizabeth Smart said, when I was abducted, the reason why I stayed was because
Wasn't that terrible?
they said that I'd be like a used piece of gum.
She was part of an abstinence education
program.
program, which research shows they're totally ineffective in keeping kids from getting pregnant, but they sure do give them a strange set of attitudes. She felt so worthless that's part of the reason that she was so traumatized. It's very hard for people who've been abducted to speak up. I think as we're talking about domestic violence, I was a domestic violence victim myself, and it was terribly hard. The shame is so immense that you can't tell people. You're just crippled from being able to reach out for help. And that's one of the reasons I went into community policing, because I used to dream of having a police officer down the block that I could ask for help, because my husband was dying of cancer. He had only a 2% possibility of living. We got married very young. And he became profoundly alcoholic and violent as a result. And my life was on the line on any given night, depending on how he felt and when he lost his temper. And he'd had a lifetime of losing his temper. He was a dangerous person, as I learned. But I didn't have anybody I could trust who would be able to work with me to solve the problem.
Which is why we do what we do. I mean, I felt very alienated and very separated, especially being from another state. I was here all by myself. And, you find oftentimes that when I was a victim of domestic violence, what happened was when I finally got back into my house and was a little more comfortable, my neighbor sexually assaulted me. And that neighbor still lives down the street from me today.
Ooh.
But it doesn't bother me. I'm so empowered. I am so empowered that there was a bus stop where young girls used to go on the porch. And I would call the school almost every day and say, "You can't do this. How come you're not checking where the bus stops are?" But I always tell people that, you can't do everything, and you can't change everyone. But make sure you try to change yourself. I could still be in a situation where, and most of the people don't know what I've been through, but I could always be in that situation again, and I would want to be empowered. Now I think I would probably hurt somebody. They'd probably come out with a couple of extra limbs missing, but.
Well, anytime I speak up, too, you're sure you're in the same situation. Women that you wouldn't expect, women that have kept that secret from a lot of people in a lot of different places will come up to you afterwards.
It was so embarrassing. It was so embarrassing. I mean, my mother had to come up from another state and stay with me for a while, and I had to send my son off to live with some. In my family, they don't know that, which is why I totally understand. Now, I'm sure they probably like, yeah, now I understand why you do the things you do in the manner in which you do it, because I've been there. But people think, oh, Rita Risper, she hasn't been through anything. No. I was witness to a murder. I saw a man get stabbed to death walking down the sidewalk in Brooklyn, and it was absolutely surreal because I was about maybe 50 feet away. I saw him get stabbed to death, and I actually saw his children come to aid him.
Uh,
And I also saw everybody walk by, including myself.
there's a level of trauma in the culture. One of the things that I used to teach when I was trying to help reporters understand, how do you approach somebody who's witnessed this kind of violence and they're in shock?
Very carefully.
Even later, years later, the post-traumatic stress that so many crime victims, their survivors face and their families face as a result of this trauma. The whole society, really, with the level of violence that we have, is a traumatized society.
Very traumatized.
And I'm concerned that we're living a certain level of denial. We think that, well, if we live in a nice neighborhood and we have, a nice new car, we'll be all right. And it's not. There's really no way to protect
And
yourself from it.
we
We have
also,
to band together to do more about this.
that's true. And we also live in a society too where some people say that people have done things that they haven't really done because they know that that's what will get that person into trouble. We live in a very interesting, dynamic society where we have to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And the one thing nobody wants to ever be involved with is the criminal system or the judicial system, especially given now that indigent defense is spiraling downhill.
Yeah.
And if anyone is listening right now, stay out of trouble. Because
Right.
indigent defense, those individuals who go to jail and think that they're going to be taken care of,
Right.
may not get the best that they should be having because indigent defense is becoming so much more watered down than it used to be.
I worked with the late director of the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency when she was trying to get the pay raised for the people who do the defense work, the public defender work. And there were people who they couldn't afford a phone, lawyers who couldn't afford a telephone because of the low rates that they were being paid to handle cases in some of the counties where it's just really like a revolving belt of people going into incarceration. The man who, and Mr. Castro's late wife, and then her latest boyfriend, when he tried to go to the police about Mr. Castro accused him of molesting the children. So these are the kinds of ways in which the law is used to blunt somebody who's trying to get attention
that
from
type
them.
of thing is what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. There are people who actually do that, and where do we actually draw the line? So when we have these
That's
kinds
why we have to have our rights protected.
and not only do we have to have our rights protected, but we also have to continually have this conversation.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about things that people don't want to talk about. We're talking about things that people want to watch on CNN over and over again, but they don't want to see you in the store without, shrinking in shame that, like they did something instead of asking you, what happened? What happened? How are you? I'm sorry for your loss.
Yes.
Keep it moving.
Yes.
Don't go into what you heard or what you didn't hear because you are just exasperating that person's problem. So I'm sorry for your loss. My thoughts are with you and your family. If you need anything, let me know and I will see if I can do it. And keep it moving.
When I trained reporters, I told them there were two safe phrases, and they're the same ones that the psychiatrist teaches to all the NYPD officers, which is, I'm sorry for your loss, or I'm sorry for what happened to you. And those are the two phrases that, because you need to acknowledge the trauma that people are feeling. But at the same time, it is so difficult because we've had so many cases where people, they mean well, but they inadvertently blurt out the wrong thing. Ann Gleason was a good friend of mine, and she was one of the founders of the local MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers here in town. And she had already lost one son to an illness, and her surviving son was killed by a drunk driver. And when her son was still hovering and the drunk driver was still hovering, a reporter came to her door and she said, I'm sorry, but I'm really not ready to speak right now. I just can't speak to the press. And he said, well, Mrs. Gleason, maybe you'll feel better when the insurance money comes in. I couldn't believe that a human being would say that to somebody who was suffering. And she called the radio, the television station to say that that's what the reporter had done, and they said, no, 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 he would never have done it. She said, look at the tape. The camera was rolling behind him, and they watched the tape, and that is what he had said. And all I can assume is that he blurted out, I mean, whatever came to mind, because I can't imagine anybody would be that intentionally
Insensitive.
cruel. But I think that's part of the challenge. The media has to be a compassionate media
We
that
have to be
is
compassionate
trained.
people.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and you feel like you're under, as a parent, you feel like you're under a microscope, or as a spouse, or it's a lot. And
Look
not
at that new legislation where they want to have parents whose kids are truant,
Mm-hmm.
right? They
Right.
want to start incarcerating the parents or penalizing the parents. Some parents are working 2 and 3 jobs, and it's so difficult for them to be able to be there all day. I mean, we're not understanding the reality of many people's lives. We just want to punish. And I think punishment does, there's just an undercurrent in the society that's quite ugly.
there's a whole undercurrent. I mean, it's really amazing to me. And even with the families that I deal with, there are special dynamics. We try to do the best that we can do for each individual situation. And we at TNCB Can, we try not to. We do really amazing at not really taking sides. I'm very protective of all of my families. Like when people say
Yeah.
things that are, you know, and I asked them, do you really know that person? Do you know how they live their lives? Do you know?
You advocate for them, which
You
is
have
critically
to.
important.
You have to. And I'm not only am I protecting the person who's no longer here, but I'm protecting all their family members. And I never thought that by starting TNCB Can that would be something I would be doing, is advocating and protecting the parents and the children and cousins and girlfriends and wives. So that's what we do effectively.
Well, Rena, tell us a little bit about what's coming up on your calendar this summer, and then we will be. What should we be looking forward to from your organization?
Absolutely. TNCB Can is doing a lot of different things this summer. Our next event's going to be the July 4th parade. We're going to have the parade, and last year was absolutely amazing. And so if anybody would like to be a part of the TNCB Can parade group, just give us an email at TNCP, that's Tom Nancy Cat Paul, CAN, at gmail.com, and we'd be more than happy to tell you how you can get involved. Mr. Bermudez is over the 4th of July parade, and we also on July 18th, which is a Thursday, is Poetry in the City.
We're all there.
Good, good. Thank you, people. We're missing a person today, so I apologize for.
I got so frustrated when I got here. My mother was like,
I
probably not
didn't get
gonna.
in that last station ID, but I think the FCC will forgive us.
Okay.
We'll talk after.
Are you okay?
I'll be okay. Are we off there? Oh, yeah, my mother is probably not gonna look very much longer, so I was like rushing down here, and then you told me to go to the Arts and Science building. and
I did.
I was
It was
in the basement, and then every person I asked on campus, I don't know where the radio
It's the
station is. I said,
you know,
are
I
you
can't.
kidding
The
me?
Able Sykes.
do they?
Nobody knew.
Yeah.
And I was I texted on Facebook like, maybe we need
No,
to
I
have
don't
another form of
despise it.
communication besides
I was on there
Facebook.
also.
And I was like, and then I went back to your Facebook page and found your phone number. And I was like, why
yeah.
didn't you? But I was so frustrated that I didn't even
Oh,
look for that
that's
to begin
terrible.
with.
Oh.
I'm
So,
sorry.
yeah. Yeah, my mom went in the hospital like 3 weeks ago, and she has like no lung capacity, and that's putting a strain on her heart. So I put her in a nursing home for like rehab. She came home Wednesday, and then today that took a really bad turn, and I've just been like, just
Well,
not what I need on top of everything else. And
if you need anything,
I know.
does anybody
Is she
want
here in
any-
town?
We just got my mother-in-law in
Anyone?
the hospital.